All right. We are live from Occupy City Hall in Rockford, Illinois. My name is Leslie Roth. I'm a member of the May 30th Alliance. I'm here with Antar. That's good enough. I don't know. I guess I'll give you the microphone. You can do your own introduction if you want to as well. But we are doing live from Occupy City Hall. This one is going to be the first of a new set of live from Occupy City Halls in which we have one overall concept, which will be a little bit more broad than the usual live from Occupy City Halls, but also more concise from the other live from Occupy City Halls, where some of those have been more of a stream of consciousness or just talking about recent events. This will be about a very specific topic, but trying to have deep dives and having a real dialogue about that topic. I would encourage anybody that's watching this to please share this video. Let me know if the audio is sounding all right in the comments. We're going to also, if anybody leaves comments, we have a laptop here, so we're going to try our best to interact with things that people are saying and questions that people may have. But before we get started with that, and before I have Antar give his introduction here as well, I just want to say that we came out here to City Hall on October 3rd, 2020, after on October 2nd, 2020, Tyrus Jones, an unarmed black man, was shot by Officer Dominic McNeese of the Rockford Police Department while he was running away. Our occupation continued through Our occupation continued through Dominic McNeese being found justified in the attempted murder of Tyrus Jones at the end of November. Our occupation continued through January 5th, 2021, when Denzel Duvant was beat at the hands of the Rockford Police Department while he was handcuffed, and one of the officers involved in that assault was Officer Dominic McNeese. Our occupation continued through April 10th, 2021, when Faustin Guaitigo was murdered by the Winnebago County Sheriff deputies inside of his home, namely by Winnebago County Sheriff Deputy Joseph Brulard. Our occupation continued when no more than 24 hours later, Jose Gonzalez Jr. Was shot while he was running away by the Rockford Police Department. And also our occupation continued through April 25th, 2021, when Raymond Jackson died in a car accident after a high-speed pursuit took place on the streets of Rockford, Illinois. So we want to say justice for Tyrus Jones, justice for Denzel Duvant, justice for Jose Gonzalez Jr., justice for Faustin Guaitigo, and justice for Raymond Jackson. We want to point out how each one of those incidents are events of police terrorism and how each one of those incidents are intertwined. And we understand that some people may not have empathy for all five of those incidents, for all five of those people, for all five of those families, but maybe they may have empathy for four or for three or for two or for one of them. And it becomes our job to extrapolate how we are all directly and indirectly connected, and if you have empathy for one of those situations, you must have empathy for the rest of those situations. And so here I'll let Antar give an introduction, and then we'll sort of dive into the topic at hand today.
Okay, my name is Antar, and I reside in Rockford, Illinois, and I was a witness, participant in the march on May 30th, and have continued, since May 30th to try to do all that I could do to help the movement to end racial injustice, police terrorism, and mass incarceration.
Okay, so today we're going to sort of speak about societal violence. We've labeled it societal violence at the moment. We may go back and alter the name of it, and I don't think it's a very specific. It's no specific definition for what it is that we're talking about. I think that's sort of part of what having a dialogue about something gets you to. It gets you to a place in which you can properly diagnose something. So right now we're just going to really talk about a lot of the symptoms of intercommunity violence, or something that some people. Again, this is before I use this terminology, I don't want this to become something that is doubled back to very often. But this concept that some people have of black on black violence. We want to sort of dive into having an actual dialogue and an actual conversation about violence that takes place within communities of color, predominantly black communities, and why that violence takes place in those communities, and how where the beginnings of that violence came from in those communities. And so I think one of the things that I'll start the conversation off with is giving an example of something that I went through yesterday, and then asking you what your thoughts are sort of about the situation. And so we're outside of City Hall, and we usually have people come up and drive up and ask questions and have conversations. Sometimes you get somebody coming up and they're a detractor. They got something negative to say. But yesterday I was having a conversation with somebody, and it was a positive conversation, wasn't a negative conversation. There was somebody that was of a different race. They were white. We were, having a conversation about police terrorism and mass incarceration, and talking about how some of the events that have taken place here in Rockford. And one of the things that one of the gentlemen in the car brought up is, what about black on black violence? I don't hear people talk about the black on black violence. And he didn't say it from a place of, at least in the midst of the conversation, it did not feel as if it came from a place of negativity, or it came from a place of animosity. It felt more that it came from a place of just not understanding, or not having ever had a conversation with somebody who dived deeper into that. So when he said it to me, because I've had it been said so many times, and because it's an interaction that I've went through multiple times now, and because the flow of the conversation was one in which I was allowed to talk and I was allowed to speak, I responded back to him about, I said, inter-community violence. That's one of the things that I try to do a lot, is when somebody says black on black violence to me, in my response back to them, I don't try to use the terminology black on black violence back. But I said, inter-community violence is something that is an effect. It's an effect. It's not a cause. When you look at all the cities in which inter-community violence happens in, if you trace back to when guns first got into a lot of these areas and into a lot of these communities, guns got into those areas and communities because black people felt like they needed to protect themselves from the outside dangers that they dealt with. It's one of the things that goes without speaking a lot of times, is that there's never been a time within being in America in which a black person or a black family or a black community have not felt that they were at some type of threat to the outside. And it's one of the things that Malcolm X, said that black people needed to get gun clubs. And again, so we have to remember that when these guns initially were put into these communities, and when black people were or not even again black people, but communities of color, when they were again for indigenous people, when they were having these guns and having these weapons, it was in a mindset of protecting themselves from an outside community, which you can see in examples of like Tulsa and other communities, black communities, in which violence from the outside came from within. So I think that you have to always remind people that the first time that these weapons were put into this community, it was because of the threat from the outside, from within. And I'll pass it to you right after I point out this. One of the things that was very interesting to me that I learned last year when I was learning about Angela Davis. Angela Davis spoke about how she grew up in Birmingham around the time that the bombing of the 4 young women took place, the bombing of the church took place. And she said that for the next year or so, it was an extended amount of time, she said her father and all the fathers in the neighborhood had shotguns and guns, and they patrolled the community, they patrolled the neighborhood day and night. It wasn't a time in which somebody wasn't up patrolling the neighborhood. And I think that one of the things that has been statistically found out is that the more that once you put a gun into certain situations, it's more likely that somebody will get shot, because of that gun being in the situation. And so even when you date things back as to the 60s, it's very likely that the same people that was patrolling that neighborhood ended up getting into some type of argument at some point in time, and somebody might have shot somebody because they had guns at their disposal that they did not initially get for a problem with a person in their own community, that they got because of the threat of the outside. And so it has to always be reminded that that no matter how many weapons and how many and what it looks like today, when these things were initially set in place, it was protection that these things were created for.
Yeah, I do want to sort of push back on the idea that there's no such thing as black on black violence. Although the terminology, is taken out of context a lot. That's why I believe that people try, inter-community violence expresses a little bit better sometimes what we're trying to express. However, although, people will say that violence amongst races or violence happens amongst people closest to you in proximity. So there's white on white violence. There will be Chinese such and such. However, there has to be something said about the uniqueness of the experience of black people that experience enslavement in America or anywhere else. And in particular, we're talking about America because we're going to get to Rockford. There is some unique aspects to what is called black on black violence. And I want to, maybe I'll put this book in the comments, or somebody can Google it, put it in the comments. And this is a name of a person who you would call sort of the father or godfather of a certain thought or philosophy. And that is Amos N. Wilson. Amos N. Wilson. He wrote a book called Black on Black Violence. The subtitle is very important. The Psychodynamics of Black Self-Annihilation in Service of White Domination. The Psychodynamics of Black Self-Annihilation in Service of White Domination. And, some of the points in the book is basically saying that what we know as black on black violence serves white supremacy. It serves racism. It helps racism. Sometimes it seems that when people are protesting or really stepping up to fight for justice, within the black community, black on black violence almost starts to rise, or at least it's highlighted a little more. Now, the book goes into all the different ways, the specific ways that black on black violence is an aid to white supremacy and domination. If we look at the plantation, we see it in terms of divide and conquer. If we're busy fighting each other, we don't have time to unite, and fight against our oppressor. And so another example is we talked about before when you look at Dr. King. When Dr. King moved to Chicago, he moved to a Woodlawn neighborhood, a neighborhood that was impoverished and violence was high. After working with some of the youth in the community and working with people in the community, Dr. King was able to redirect a lot of youth that were heading for lives of violence and crime. He was able to redirect them into the struggle for human rights and justice. And violence in the neighborhood and the community that he did this in dropped. Also, when Fred Hampton Sr. was active in Chicago, he was able to do the same thing. And so when you look at, and there are other examples of basically saying that if you redirect young people that are engaged in what you call black on black violence, and you channel that energy and get them involved in the liberation struggle, violence drops. However, because black on black violence has been used in service of white supremacy, what we call white supremacy, you saw the powers that be in Chicago rather eliminate Fred Hampton Jr. or eliminate Dr. King rather than eliminate what is called black on black violence. And I think that's the case, in Rockford, where before the leaders of this community or those that sit in power, before they will relinquish white supremacy, they will either allow black on black violence to continue or even encourage it or even stimulate it in certain ways. The one other thing I'll say before I pass it about one of the unique aspects of what we call black on black violence, and this can be found in the book. A lot of people don't realize that the suicide rate amongst African American males from the ages of 17 to 24 is upwards of 35%. And so we're talking about a psychological issue that a lot of these young people have. And the cause of that, let's come bring it all the way around. The cause of this issue with the young people and the cause of black on black violence has to be traced to the root, which is racism. And say all that to say, if we're going to find solutions to what people call black on black violence, we have to study it a little more, get to the heart, the root of it, and deal with the fact that racism or white supremacy is at the heart of what people call black on black violence.
And this is one of the things that me and you have had conversations like this often. And as we're talking and I'm listening to you, I'm realizing how this is just gonna be like just how most of those conversations go. How once I start talking to you and we start having a dialogue, the unique way in which the unique perspective in which you have on a lot of these things makes me question things and look at things in a way that I don't usually look at them, or I wouldn't usually look at them without the challenging in which that it is that you do. And so one of those things is when you spoke about the suicide rate amongst black males and amongst the age group that you spoke of in black males. And I think that that's something that is not spoken about enough at all as well. And I think that that goes towards what you talked about of it being used as a tool for white supremacy. When it's used as a tool for white supremacy, you don't speak about the people who are victims in that type of a nature, because there's no way to stigmatize that. There's no way to weaponize that or to criminalize that. And I think that gets you into another deeper conversation where I think back, how long has that, because certain data and certain information has only been kept up, recently. And I looked up some of those things that you said, and I want to read through it before I say it on the live. But that has to have been a thing that historically, has to have been higher for black people. I can't imagine a time, I'm sure, of course, there was probably time once you trace it statistically or whatever, but I would imagine percentage-wise, based on the things that you had to endure while being black, which gets us to the concept that I think isn't spoken enough as well, too, about violence, in that a lot of times violent acts are build-ups of microaggressions that somebody deals with, especially with younger people. The younger somebody is, I can remember being younger where you can just have a bad enough day at 15 where, you have in the morning you get your mom or your dad yelling at you to hurry up and get on the school bus. You get on the school bus, they messing with you on the school bus. You go to class, you got issues with teachers in a certain class, and it's hot outside, ain't no air, and then the kid that cut you in line at lunch, you push them and you get into a fight, and I think that that's something that doesn't go spoken about enough, is that the amount of things that young black men and young black women and young black people have had to regularly deal with, no matter what time you put them at. They have to deal with the buildup of those things, and a lot of times it's a buildup in which they don't feel like they can speak about, like they can't communicate. One of the things that one young person told me before, because I'm just now getting to a different age bracket where I'm really talking to a young person, and they're telling me about an experience that I'm a lot further removed from, but I can remember. Somebody was telling me about a teacher calling them at a school here, calling them a nigger, and the context in which it was used in is that they didn't. Okay, I should say they used the word nigger. They didn't call them that, but the context in which it was used in was that they was arguing back and forth with the teacher, and they was, as they were saying back and forth, they said nigger this, nigger that, and the teacher was like, "Look at my skin. You see me? I'm not nigger." And then they took the kid off or whatever. And I asked them, like, why didn't, what they said then, why didn't they say talk to their parents about it or whatever? And they said, because of their family situation that, they didn't feel their parents would understand or their parents would hear it. And they said, they said something to the principal about it. The principal, didn't hear. They said that assistant principal, because this was a assistant principal who did this. They said the other assistant principal who was black told them that they not supposed to be they shouldn't be using that word. And when you use that word, you make so white people can use that word. And so then I think to myself, now if this person go after they having this whole thing has happened for a day, they done dealt with this. They can't hit the teacher or do nothing to the principal, the assistant principal who said it. They can't do nothing to lash out towards them. Everybody that they done felt like they should be able to go to for help, they not there to help them. They got to feel helpless in this situation. When the next time an opportunity arises for this young person to take some type of power in their own hand or feel like they can help themselves, if somebody push them or say the wrong thing to them, or let's say that some kid now say call them a nigga, and now or some white kid call them a nigga, or now they feel like, well, I can't do nothing about this happening with this teacher, but now I'm gonna take the chance to do something now here. I think that's something, the build up of mental the build up of a mental burden that young black people go through is not spoken enough when some of these acts of violence happen. Here, I'll pass it to you.
I was thinking, like, the other thing about I'm sure you've heard it. We've heard people say it. Well, there's no such thing as black on black violence, so I'm not going to address that issue. I think that's been a cop out because there is a dynamic that is unique. There's many different ways. Different ways we can look at it. Someone gave an analogy about a slave ship in which the captain of the slave ship opens the top to where all of the enslaved people are at the bottom, and he throws enough food for only 20 people. However, it's 50 to 100 people down there, and then they sit back and watch the people fight. Now, of course, maybe they could have negotiated some amongst themselves and divided or whatever, but in this particular scenario, and so we're talking about a problem that goes way back, and because our young people aren't being educated, society is not being educated. They do not know, the root or the history of this animosity. So each generation is almost taught like they are the cause of this violence or this animosity towards each other. But we see it in older generations and other segments of society. We see it in Rockford, divide and conquer, where city market has become a divisive thing in that some black people or some African Americans has decided that they don't care about, the cause that the people that are protesting or boycotting or are trying to educate people about city market. They care about their own gain or their own benefit. And that's an example of, some food being thrown for a few to that'll cause us. And then we say, why do the younger generation do it? And we demonstrated this for them. We demonstrated politically, we demonstrated economically. And so getting to that, doing it basically, and you've been talking about this, and that's the basis, doing a critical analysis of what's called black on black violence. And it's astonishing that you don't hear critical analysis of black on black violence and in many contexts, and you definitely don't hear that in terms of Rockford. And we bring that up now because there's been a lot of there's been some, a lot of death, a lot of violence, and people are up in arms, and we see the same mistake being made where people aren't doing a critical analysis of the problem, but they are either put in a position to bring forth a solution, or they are already in a position to bring forth a solution. And if we use the analogy of going to the doctor, you go to the doctor and tell them that you're having pain, internal pain. They don't do an x-ray or any type of investigation to find out what the problem is, but they decide on a particular treatment, or they decide they're going to do surgery without even knowing what the problem is. And that gets us to the point of talking about the mayor or other persons in leadership being racist, and point out to people we're not talking about individualized racism. We're talking about a person being able to sit in a seat in which they make vital misdiagnosis of one of the most vital, if not the most vital problem in Rockford. If the top leadership in your city has publicly misdiagnosed the problem, then how then can we sit there and blame the youth? And the adults in the community refuse to do a critical analysis of the issue.
I wanna since I pulled these stats up, I want to just read these real quick for the suicide. This is from the Suicide Prevention Resource Center for anybody who might want to look this up or substantiate it. Excuse me. Black and African American are terms used to describe people descended from any of the black racial groups of Africa. On this web page, we use the term black, and the data do not include people of Hispanic ethnicity. In 2018, black populations composed an estimated 13.4% of the U.S. population. At 7.2 per 100,000, the age-adjusted suicide rate for black populations in 2018 was approximately half the overall U.S. suicide rate of 14.2 per 100,000. So let me see. What's that? What's 7.2? The age-adjusted suicide rate for the black populations in 2018 was approximately half the overall U.S. suicide rate. So, rate, age-adjusted, the rate. Okay, so the rate. So that's just the. Okay, so black people. So this is saying black people committed suicide at double the rate of the average American. Okay, my fault. I don't mean to. Somebody might have got that before me. My fault. I was just reading through it. Okay, so the first stat that they have here. Again, was speaking to the point that Antar brought up, is that black people commit suicide at double the rate of the average American.
In the demographic that's associated with a lot of the inter-community violence, that's important to understand that.
Yeah, and again, we should again date that back to one of the points that we were that was being brought up when Antar said that is the residual effects of this inter-community violence, of black on black violence. Again, because we do want to make sure, like Antar said, we are diagnosing things, and I do agree that. That is used as a cop-out a lot, that somebody decides to not dive into the conversation because of the terminology that somebody uses, which I think is another part of having a meaningful dialogue, is coming together to have a common understanding of a word, or a common understanding of a definition. And if something, I think that if something means one thing to me and it means something else to you, we'll never be able to have a conversation that's productive, because we'll keep, sort of butting heads on these words or these ideas that we don't agree on. And so, but again, to put this into perspective, what we're reading about the suicide rates, is that the residual effects of the violence that happens in the black community is not just finished with once a shooting happens or once a murder happens, that these young people, which a lot of time get vilified and get demonized and dehumanized and stigmatized and all of these other negative things that are entrenched in this web, really that it's a web of violence. It's almost, to say, using sometimes it's hard to use the right word to describe how violence works, but anybody that's been around any of these type of issues know that it's a web that happens. One thing happens and it leads to all of these other things happen, and it becomes intertwined, and it's not as simple as all the time is just don't get into a fight, or just don't hang out with those people, or just don't go outside, or just, it's just not that simple. And so that's why I use web of violence. But these young people who get caught in these webs of violence, it's not over with for them once somebody is murdered and somebody is killed. They deal with the mental attrition that comes with seeing a picture with 15 of your friends on it, and then as every year you look up, another friend is going off the picture. And then you get to a point where you're looking at the picture and half the people who was once in the picture not alive no more. Or even seeing the cycle of growing up and your father being killed, and now you have an age where your friends is being killed and they sons is not having their fathers around. And I think another one of the things that people don't think about a lot of times is that for a lot of people, this is something that they literally are born into. This happens before they're even old enough to understand death and to comprehend death all the way. Somebody they know has been murdered. Somebody they know has been killed. And that, is a permanent, like how you were talking about a psychological effect that happens. It's a to even extrapolate out to the metaphor where the bread being thrown out for enough of 20 people and it's 50 people there. If you say that is that if you do different age groups on some of those people are going to get to a place where once they're old enough, even if you threw out enough bread, because of how their mind state is now, they think they got to fight over the bread. They think they got to fight to get to the bread. Yeah, to grab more bread, and then what effect does it have on the people who aren't the type of people who they're willing to do that to get the bread, and they see these things being done? Or even what effect does it have on this person that gets all the bread and they have to go through all of these violent acts or this fighting to try to get to the bread? The idea of what does it profit a man to gain the world if he loses his soul? And I think that that's not a thing that's spoken about enough. A lot of people who I've had conversations with who have been in the streets, to use a term, for lack of a better term, they talk about how it's hard for them to sleep, how they have to drink to sleep or smoke to sleep, or they have to be high to move around, or be high to function, or be drunk to function, or they got to keep their minds off of certain things, and it's, and I'm going a little further. I'm going to pass it to you here in a second, but it's even illustrated in, the music, and illustrated in the art. It's always been illustrated in the art that black people have created, the inherent violence that is at the heart of being black in the society. Right now, it may sound like Lil Durk or Chief Keef or whoever the rapper is, and 10, 20 years ago, it may have sounded like Tupac, but you keep going back and it sounds like Strange Fruit, and Strange Fruit, you keep, you date it further back, all of those things are, entrenched within there. And so I think that that's one of the things that is forgotten is the, like we were speaking about. And that again, that goes towards back where I initially was trying to do, is that speaks back towards the residual effects that suicide manifest in suicide. And let me run through these rates real quick without cutting myself off, and I'm going to pass it to Antar. Yeah. Among black populations, suicide rates peak during adolescence. I think so. It might be, I don't know, it might be Sprites though. It might be a Sprite. Among black populations, suicide rates peak during adolescence and young adulthood, then decline. This is a different pattern than is seen in the overall U.S. population, where suicide rates peak in midlife. And again, that goes back towards what we were speaking about the residual effects of young people dealing with this type of violence that is at the root and at the heart of being black in this society. I just want to read through that again. Among black populations, suicide rates peak during adolescence and young adulthood and then decline. This is a different pattern than is seen in the overall U.S. population, where suicide rates peak in midlife. And I think that another thing to be added or to be said to that is that I'm pretty sure if we looked at the ages in which those suicide rates are peaking, that one of the other things that would peak there is murder rates would also peak in that age range, I'm sure. And then here goes another fact. As in the overall U.S. population, the suicide death rate for men is more than 3 times the rate for women in black populations. The suicide death rate for the overall U.S. population is approximately double that of black populations for both male and females. Compared to the overall U.S. population, similar percentages of black adults reported past year serious thoughts of suicide, a past year suicide plan, and a past year suicide attempt. So that one was similar to the other rankings, to the other statistics. Excuse me. Among high school youth, a smaller percentage of black youth report seriously considering attempting suicide or making a suicide plan in the past year than the overall U.S. population. However, a higher percentage of black youth have attempted suicide in the past year or made a suicide attempt requiring treatment when compared to the overall U.S. population.
I just wanted to say one thing about that might not be in these rates. Two things that might not be in these rates. One is the suicidal tendencies of black youth. Like you said, may not be the typical planning, and some of their suicide is, killing someone else or engaging in violence when like those rappers in Chicago that would make diss tracks, and they knew once they named certain people in the diss track, they were going to be killed. But to continue to do that is suicidal. Just like the other thing that may not be included is if you are a black male especially, and you had a bar and you ran at a police officer, they call that suicide by cop, because you should have known that he was going to shoot you. You should expected to know, not if you a white male, but if you a black male and you pick up a pipe and you run at an officer, this has actually been classified this way before. Instances when police officers have killed black males, they classify it as suicide by cop.
One here where they did that.
Yeah.
Early 2000s or late 90s. I can't remember who it was specifically, but it was one here like that.
And the reason for bringing up suicide in relationship to black on black violence is that if we don't know that a lot of these young people are really suicidal, or they have suicidal tendencies, we won't understand how deep their issue is. And so when we try to convince them not to engage in self-destructive behavior when they don't want to live, if we don't get to the heart of why they don't want to live, and I'm not going to say that I know all of those reasons, but that's something that a critical analysis would do, is why is it so many of our young people don't want to live? It's not just an economic or material thing. That's part of it. But it's also a psychological part of it.
Yeah, that's very true. I think that, that drives back home the idea that you said about the throwing in enough for 20 when it's 50. That the residual effects that some of these things have, because when you say some of those things, one of the things that I think back to is, and I think that one of the things I should point out too is that, and this is sort of like a thesis that I got. I don't got this all the way ironed out, so this is a little rough. But I think the generation that I'm in is of a generation in which it was the hip hop. I don't want to say that it's not a hip hop generation, but it's a generation in which a lot of our early memories and our early, with TVs and music videos and CDs and music becoming more prevalent, and hip hop going to be becoming the number one music genre in the world. One of the things that happened is that became very reflective of what it was like to grow up being black by the music of the time, and I remember being younger and listening to, or I remember now as being older, this Little Uzi Vert got a song that was real popular, and in the hook he sung, I don't really care if I die. I don't know. I'm not gonna try to sing it, but when I think about that song, and I enjoyed that song, but I also remember thinking like, damn, it's a lot of young people listening to this song. What is, what's like the psychological effect of that? But then I also think back to when I was younger, and I couldn't wait till I was old enough to go buy Ready to Die. Go by Life After Death. And when I was I got even when I was my son's age, maybe a little couple years older, when I was like around 12, 13, Tupac was my favorite rapper from then on, for a long time. Biggie was my favorite, one of my favorite rappers. Those was my favorite albums, and a lot of my favorite songs was the songs in which they were speaking about this closeness to death, or this, like this suicidal tendency, or this the desire to not live, and as you're talking and I'm thinking about those things and all these different things tracing back in my head, it makes me think about, again, when we get to the root of what it means to have been black here in America, to have been black in this country, to have come from Africa, to dealt with the things that it took to just get to this point, to be on the land, the Middle Passage. I can't imagine how, they talk about how DNA is ingrained, you got to fear snakes because of your past ancestors having feared snakes. I would imagine that it's got to be such a psychological imprint, a lack of a desire to live, where dying was almost an escape. Like that's what in the Middle Passage, the people who jumped over, they wasn't doing that in the same type of thought process one person may have of dying, where like a pity for them. They was doing that out of bravery, out of courageousness, out of the fact that they would rather have died than be raped or be the things that they seen was happening to them. And so then what does that do to the people who survived that, and then they have children, and even I can't imagine being a slave. And they talk a lot of times about how people live through diseases because they have a will to live, and how that will to live was had to be circumvented, even to run away, anybody, the same thing you're talking about, how like you running at a pole with a cop, and you going to shoot a cop, not shoot a cop, but you shooting at somebody in the community when could lead to you making a diss song, saying things could lead to your death. Anybody that was running away from a plantation was ready to die. You ain't running away from the plantation because you want to live this full life and you want to have a great life and you think about all the things you're gonna do. You finish. You done.
Get rich or die trying.
Yeah,
Get free or die trying.
100%. Get free or die trying. And I think the same thing with even like uprisings, when they got to the point of like Nat Turner and all of these, anybody that did a slave uprising, you was at the point where you was okay with dying. You at a point where you are more likely to die from engaging in these actions than you are likely to survive or to succeed in taking those actions. And so I think even when you trace back to that, the fact that, and I'll pass it back to you here in a second, but I want to say two things. I want to wrap up that point that I started earlier. But even when I think about the 60s, and think about James Meredith, down in Mississippi, walking in Mississippi and then getting shot. He walking by himself. Do I think that James Meredith, would have, got in front of a train or, done something to take his own life in that manner? No, I don't think that was the mind state he was in. But he had to be in a mind state, like you said, that was of a suicidal tendency or a suicidal action, when he was willing to go in the 60s and march in Mississippi by himself. They shot him. They be based off the fact that they shot him. You can see that that's true. The same thing with a lot of those marches and a lot of the things that took place back then at those times, when they knew what the repercussions could be for those things, when they knew, even when they talk about, some of the quote unquote riots that people may have seen taking place, when they knew what those things could lead to, when they knew how those things could happen. You're doing a live on Facebook. When you knew what those things could lead to engage in those actions, to be willing to take that type of a risk, and so I think that it's manifested in different ways now than it may have looked or manifested then. But I think that is a tendency or something that's been also at the root and at the heart of the black experience here in America, where that's almost synonymous. It's almost a strength, I think about watching Baby Boy and Tupac, the picture at the mirror of Tupac up there, and the same thing when somebody's friends or their homies get killed. It's a strength that they put into that, and of course, if you don't understand it, you don't understand that, but it is, those things are there. So, but what I wanted to say about the hip hop generation thing is that I think that a lot of times you can listen to the music of that's made, that comes out right now, and it can tell you a temperature of what it is, the climate is like in the black generation. I think you could have done it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I think it's a reason why it's 2021, and it baffles me that people get into this place with the police. Growing up black, I was always knew the police was what the police was. I knew the song Fuck the Police before I even knew NWA all the way. And so the black society has always been in a place where saying this is what our reality is. This is what our experience is. It's crazy to see how long it's taken for the society to catch up to some of these things, and to see that, when NWA made Fuck the Police in 1980, 89 or whatever, and they got arrested for performing it somewhere, that was a sign of the political imprisoning that was still going on, that in 80s you could not on a song have artistic freedom to say fuck the police without the police arresting you and treating you in that nature, and so I think that that's just one of the other things that I wanted to point out.
And to that point, they were arrested for performing Fuck the Police, but they could say fuck the ops, fuck the Bloods, fuck the Crips, fuck my mama, fuck my sister. And that goes back to another aspect of the uniqueness of what is called black on black violence is that on the plantation, and even trying to bring this all around to the root. Leslie is pretty good at keeping us on local, keeping us local, and making sure that we cross reference these issues to what's going on in Rockford, and that's what we want to do. But in a time of slavery, and even in a time of Jim Crow, you knew you could commit violent acts against other black people, But one of the things that even when you look at the inception of what is called the police in America, you see that when they were policing they were making sure that black people couldn't escape from slavery, and they were protecting the slave owners' property. You never heard about them actually going break up fights in the plantation. You never heard of them going into the plantation to break up fights amongst the black people. There's always been of containment, and that's why we want to get around to talking about the interrelationship between police terrorism and black on black violence. That they have the same root. They're almost the same thing. One leads into the other. They feed off of each other. And that's why, you'll hear people saying, well, what about black on black violence? Well, if you see us protesting or demonstrating or educating ourselves and try to educate others about police terrorism, racial discrimination, and mass incarceration, you should know that we are talking about black on black violence and in black on black violence. And really, there should know one of the things we want to get to, and with the teach-ins that May 30th Alliance has done, one of the things we want to get to is making sure that there are no discussions of intercommunity violence, black on black violence, without talking about racism, without talking about how it's a tool of white supremacy. In fact, young people respond better. It's almost a slap in the face of a young person that's suicidal, does not really want to live, or doesn't understand life. It's like being an alien. Black youth have to feel like they're in the Twilight Zone. Like, what's going on? What is this world about? I'm demonized. I'm food insecure. I'm miseducated. There's microaggressions against me. There's macroaggressions against me. All of these things are going on. And the people who are supposed to know, my teachers, my pastors, political leaders, non-for-profit organizations, they're telling me, pull up my pants, get education, talk right, walk right, and I'm suicidal. That means that, if a person is suicidal, you don't try to address them in that way.
No, I agree. I think that one of the things that has always been, and I think it's coincidental because I believe that I think one of the things that has even been used to address the effect of black on black violence and the effect of intercommunity violence has been people addressing effects. Because that's what that is. When you tell somebody to pull their pants up, and when you don't ask them how old they were the first person they knew that got murdered, how old they were, or when you don't ask them, you're not asking them questions to give you a deeper understanding into why violence is something that they feel is a useful instrument to deal with the things that they are dealing with. I think that another thing that, and I want to say this and then I want to speak on racism, but I think another thing that has happened far too often is that people forget how deeply ingrained violence has been into humanity, and how further back you go, how barbaric humanity is, and how hard and how difficult and how many things have had to happen a lot of times against humanity's own will, to force humanity to be more humane, to force people to be more humane, whether they were in Africa or in Asia or in Europe or in North America. The further back you go, the less humane for, if me or you, either one of us would be dropped 500 years ago somewhere, the things we would see people do and how they handle things and how things would be treated would be, it would be crazy. But I say that to say that So even when you start to trace back violence, you have to think about how whether it's black on black violence or white on white violence or any other type of violence that a nationality does to themselves, part of the reason for that violence has to be blamed not just on a society, but on humanity and how humanity has been as a whole. One of the things, and I am going to point this out, but I'm just, again, give an example. I was watching a movie with my son, and we went to go put the movie on, and I told him, I'm trying to make sure it's, no nothing crazy happened in the movie. That's the same thing. I'm looking at the movie to see what it is. I'm like, all right, I don't think nothing, violent, crazy. I don't think nothing violent, crazy happened. So I put the movie on, and maybe like 3 minutes within the movie, they show like some cut scenes of somebody getting stabbed and there was some blood. And he was like, oh, I thought you said nothing crazy happened. I'm like, oh, I didn't think nothing crazy happened. My fault. And I'm like, let's find it. We put a different movie on. So we put a different movie on. And within the first 5 minutes of this movie, somebody got killed too. But it was a spaceship. The spaceship blew open and somebody flew out and they flew into space. But they still, so it was still violence was there. The death, the attacking, all of those things was still there. It just looked differently. And I think that that's one of the things that has also happened is that a lot of the violence that happens on a day-to-day basis looks a lot differently than it looks a lot differently than it once looked. Similar to the racism where, it was a time where, it was a time where people, guns weren't as prevalent. It wasn't as many guns out. And so people got in fights more often, or people, did stabbings more often. In England, it's not as many guns available, so it's a lot more stabbings that happen. And so I think that one of the things that we have to remember, especially when people talk about like put the guns down or get rid of the guns or y'all got to stop shooting each other. Back in the day, we just fought. That still doesn't get, that's an effect again. You're just worried about the gun being gone. But if you get rid of the gun and they still have this violent nature is still there in the society, people will stab each other, people will beat each other to death. And of course it'll be, somebody's argument will be, well, it won't be as many people that get shot by guns. But then you're not trying to address the problem fully, and so I think that I think that one of the things that has to happen is that we have to start to address violence in itself, not addressing shootings, not addressing murders, not addressing, and I think those things still have to be addressed as well. I'm not saying those things shouldn't be addressed. We have to start addressing how come we don't as a society have more conversations in the midst of things being heated or disagreements, or why we aren't as a society more comfortable with, Dr. King said this, agreeably disagreeing. Why, and I've seen this happen a lot of times with this where somebody will disagree with what we're out here for and they can't leave. They just got to stay here and continue to talk about why they disagree, and they get more and more upset when with their disagreement, instead of just being like, okay, we disagree. We don't see eye to eye on this. I'm gonna just go and walk away and continue on with my day. It's like they can't leave, and so that's just an example. But I want to say this and then end it. I think when we talk about how racism feeds black on black violence and racism black on black violence feeds white supremacy, I think that, for me, and I'll ask, and you can have a rebuttal to this or a response to this. I'm sure you got some other things, that you also would say. I covered a few things, but for me, when I think about how racism directly perpetuates and affects it, I think about how racism disproportionately affects poverty, and how the further back you go, being black makes you more likely to be within poverty, and black people disproportionately are within poverty. And then that makes me think about miseducation. If you have poverty, then you probably live in a neighborhood where the education is not up to par to the standard of somebody who is not in poverty. And then both of those things lead me to think about lack of opportunities in life, not just job opportunities, but even opportunities to have enough money to travel, or opportunities to think about traveling, or opportunities to know the names of different states to have the desire to travel. And and then eventually to jobs and housing and stuff like that, and then that gets all of those things gets me to the place of thinking about how all of those things make you more likely to be susceptible to the black market, or to having a job where you're selling drugs, or having a job where you're selling guns, or having a job where you running numbers if it was back in the day, or having some type of job where you don't need a degree for it, or you don't need to have no high school diploma for it, or you don't need to have no clean record for it, or you don't need to be able to have no transportation to get back and forth there. And so then you end up with with people who have dealt with racism through their entire life, dealt with poverty through their entire life, dealt with miseducation through their entire life, and all of those become the psychological traumas that you're talking about, that become that psychological effect. And now they're dealing with things in the black market where violence is an option. I think, again, and I'm going to pass it to you for real. But I think one of the things that we have to also remember is that just like on what some people may consider low-scale violence, which is maybe somebody committing violence over a kilo of cocaine, or the side of town that somebody is on, or a rival gang, there's the violence goes the same way in the higher scales, where if somebody killed a wrong person in America, do this wrong thing to an American soldier, they blow a whole village up. They go in and invade a whole village. If a city or a country was perpetuating some of the wrongs that happened in Chicago and in these big cities, America would find that as a reason to go in and evade and say, we're going to put democracy here. Look how they treating these black people here. So it's not as if violence exists only on the street level in America. At every level that you watch and every level that you can see, violence exists.
Yeah, and to that point, and to the point of the uniqueness of what is called black on black violence, this very country, like you hear people saying that you can't talk about racism without talking about capitalism or economics. And I would say that you can't talk about violence in America. You can't talk about violence in America without talking about racism. In fact, the way that this country was founded, and we were just dealing with this on the 4th of July, that when you consider the fact that the Americans broke away from their foreparents, the British, because of the question of enslavement of black people. Because of the question, the British had outlawed slavery. So the Americans wanted to continue to enslave black people. So they used violence to continue that enslavement. And then going to the Civil War, it was violence based on something to do with black people. And so to not look at how those things interconnect with the violent reactions that you see going on, and adding other factors on top of that too, but it's inhumane and it's racist, because I want to bring up another name, Neely Fuller Jr. Look up Neely Fuller Jr. He gives he's probably what you would consider like the father of certain critical analysis around racism. He was also the teacher of Frances Cress Welsing, who's seen as like the mother of the color confrontation theory. But Neely Fuller Jr., he described white supremacy as the psychic and material control of all non-white people globally by white people. He defined white supremacy. You know, I have my issues with the terminology supremacy, but his definition is that. Yeah, but that he said now his definition of white supremacy is the psychic and material or economic control of non-white people by white people globally. And that's important because we tend to concentrate on the economic aspect or the material aspect. And I honestly believe that's one of the reasons why our youth are suicidal, why they are violent towards each other, because they don't have the right direction. They don't have the right education. And Neely Fuller Jr., I like his definition of education. His definition of education is what to do and what not to do and why. What to do, what not to do, and why. We young people Young people are not learning what to do, what not to do, or why, because critical thinking or critical analysis is not something that's being modeled by older generations. And we know that because of the big dust up over what is called critical race theory. Go look and study who they call the godfather of the critical race theory, Derek Bell. Critical race theory basically says that people in the law field, in the education field, or whatever field should understand how we got to the point that we are in terms of race relations in America. We should understand racism and its effects on all aspects of life in America, and that racism is not an individual aberration or something that happens when someone calls someone a name. It's systematic and it permeates everything and everywhere. And so that you can't. Let's stop talking about black on black violence isolated from racism and white supremacy. And especially bringing it back to Rockford, we understand that the weed tax money or what have you is going to be distributed to non-for-profits or community organizations, and one of the reasons for the money will be to try to stop youth violence or youth crime or whatever. We should create an environment where it is hard for people to be in positions of leadership to affect youth violence or youth crime without them having an understanding of critical race theory, having an understanding of what racism really is, having an understanding of white supremacy is. And one of the reasons why you saw the so-called white conservatives fight so hard against what is called critical race theory is because it would create a situation where you can't be the mayor and you don't know what about racism. You can be the mayor now and don't know what racism is. You don't even have to have a definition. You can ask him, what's your definition of racism? He'll say, I'll look it up later. I don't know. That's not you don't have to be a teacher of black children. You don't have to be. You don't have to know critical race theory to be a pastor. And if we don't know it within our own community, and going to the point of how the psychodynamics of racism, and like you said, now we'll send our children to go fight in the army violently to go so the U.S. can fight other people over land and resources and oil. But if our kids start fighting over territory and material, they're crazy. We don't understand it. And that's another thing. Stop saying you don't understand the violence, especially if you are in a position of leadership. If you are in a position of leadership in the black community, it is your responsibility to know the root cause of crime and violence amongst our children. It is your responsibility to do that. Now, albeit once you show that you understand this, they might not give you the grant money no more.
That's true. You might want to hold back, letting them know that you know that. I think that one of the things that we have, and we haven't really, and I think that everything's been flowing well, and everything has been good, and we've been touching on very important subjects. But I do think that one of the things that I believe is unique about what it is that we've been doing here, and we have been trying to create here, and that we will continue to do and continue to create and to cultivate here, is how all of these broad things affect us specifically and affect us collectively as a city and collectively as a county. And so one of the things that we're talking about, all the things that we just spoke about basically for that first hour there, for that first portion there, I want to then bring that understanding, bring that thought process, bring that over to Rockford. And trace that back to however far back in Rockford. I can't remember. I looked up the year once before, the first year Rockford existed, but I'll look that up again. But let's use that same thought pattern onto the things that are going on in Rockford and how violence has existed in Rockford. And so one of the things that I would say is, in the time in which the time in which I've grown up, and I'm 29 years old. Been growing up in Rockford since 2000 and since 2001. I've been here. So I wasn't born here, but I was raised here. My family before was from here. I got family that's still here. So I'm of Rockford, a product of Rockford. And I'll never forget this. One time I was in a lift. I was getting in the lift and I was riding with somebody, and he was telling me how he drove in Rockford and how he was from Rockford, but he had moved his kid out of Rockford when he was real young, and his kid was never from Rockford, and his kid didn't understand how Rockford was. And he said every person that he knew in Rockford had been a victim of a violent crime at least one time. And I understood what he was saying. He wasn't necessarily saying that somebody went and told the police that they was in a violent crime, or that somebody was a victim, or being in a violent. You can be in a fight. You've been in a violent crime. I've been in fights. So when he said that to me, that was sort of what I thought about. And maybe the words he used wouldn't be the same words that I would use. But when I think about people that I know here, even people who aren't violent people, they've been in situations of violence. And they were in situations of violence that some of those circumstances existed before they were born. I remember one of the things that, I don't know if it was my class specifically that this happened in, but they talked about it was 30 people in the class, and they spoke about how a certain amount of the people in the class would end up in jail. A certain amount of people in the class would end up, being shot or being killed. I think was the word killed, not shot. And some of those things, that is a real statistic, that exists for a reason. And I think one of the things that, and I think statistics can be racist. So statistics can be very biased, but I think it's also sometimes you can find insight into how statistics are set up. And the fact that, you can put 30 people in a room somewhere. You could put a certain graduating class or a certain elementary class or whatever in a room somewhere, and you can say, based on the way the society works here, this will happen to a certain amount of you. This will happen to a certain amount of you. And it reminds you, and I think this happens a lot too often, that we're in a place where America has existed for hundreds of years. Certain things have happened thousands and thousands upon times over. We have to stop putting the onus on the individual and start putting the onus on these systems and start putting the onus on these institutions. And so I say that to say, when I extrapolate these things back to Rockford, I think to myself, how many times has a shooting happened over the past years in the same area in Rockford, in the same block in Rockford, in the same 3-block, 5-block radius in Rockford? And at 29 years old, I can think about being 23 years old and hearing about shootings happening in a certain block radius, in a certain area radius. And I can think about the opportunities that was available for that community in that area when it happened, and when I was 23, and I can think about the opportunities and the things that's available for that community now, 29, and they look the exact same. I can think about what the sidewalks look like, or the streets look like, or just the way that the neighborhood is, kept up. And not by the people. Now, I'm not talking about the people living in the neighborhood. I'm talking about things that the city takes care of. There's certain things you will never see on this street happening. After that parade, people came and littered all over the street. Ain't no street in this city that ever been littered how this street was littered that day. They got it all up. They got it all right up. So that's goes back onto the system, the institution when you speak of those things. And so then I think about the same thing for the schooling. And the schools that's been there, they've been there the same way. Any issues that I was hearing about when I was in high school about with the school system not being good, as an adult with the kid now, I'm hearing people talk about that's how they feel about their kids and what they trying to avoid for their kids. So again, that's the institution again, that the onus has to be put on when a generation has passed and these same issues are existing. And so I think that when you speak about how deeply racism is in American society, you have to also speak about how deeply racism is in Rockford specifically. And I use this stat a lot, but I think that is just very telling of the racism here. And again, last year it came out that if you are black, you are 3 times as likely to be pulled over while you are driving in Rockford than if you are white. And the population of white people is triple that of black people here. And so that's one of the things that people don't think about, is the amount of interactions black people have with police officers who are violence workers. Police officers are workers of violence. Anytime somebody black, I think the scene in Boys in the Hood illustrated perfectly where, Trey went, he got pulled over by the police. The police, did a psychological thing. They necessarily beat him or shoot him, but the psychological violence that they did to them was damning to the point where he was ready. He was swinging and fighting after when he got back to his girl house. Because he felt so powerless that he just wanted to take that power back at any chance that he could. And so then when you think about that, and then you think that black people have to deal with that 3 times as often than white people have to deal with that, then they have to. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, not to cut you, but actually, one of the basic thing that Amos and Wilson said in the book Black on Black Violence is that black on black violence is a result of black people's powerlessness in America or within the system of white supremacy. Let me say that black on black violence is rooted in our lack of powerlessness. So how if we are powerless as adults, as black adults, black people, in no matter if you're a pastor, a politician, a leader, or whatever, the young people know who really got the power. Who can they, if the police came and apprehended them, tied them down, threatened to shoot them, which black person in Rockford can they call to come rescue from that situation without question, without no doubt that they could do it? That the moment that the black youth said, okay, such and such coming, and the police let them go and run, leave their guns behind too. Our young people know we don't have no power. So if you want to end black on black violence, let's figure out how we can have power. And one of the ways speaking of that, this is a pretty good segue. The TV show Power, 50 Cent, right? So you remember when Taraji P. Henson and 50 Cent got into it? I don't know. So 50 Cent went to Taraji P. Henson, and this is related to city market and what the people who are proposing to deal with youth violence in Rockford are guilty of. So 50 Cent told Taraji P. Henson when he saw the script and I think the promotions for Empire, he was like, "Listen, that's my idea. They took that from me." You know what her response was? "I listen to dollars and not cents." We told these people about the racism, about the violence that were perpetuated by the leadership of City Market. What did they tell us? They don't listen to protests. They listen to. And then you want to know why the young people want to rob you? We lucky that the violence is not more because we deserve more. Some people need to get carjacked every time they walked out their house because you're responsible for it. We're responsible for it. And the key, like I said, is education. This is the key. People always say, well, you talking about the problem. The solution is education. And I don't mean degrees at no HBCU or no other school. I mean teaching people what to do, when to do it, why to do it. Okay, we told the people, don't go to City Market. Don't participate in City Market. Don't show young people that the white city leaders have the power and that our unity is not strong enough to trump you having to go try to work a deal with the city instead of working a deal with your people, which would show young people some sense of power within our community. You can't stop inter-community violence in our community and be powerless. And if you think you got to go to the city and that city market is more powerful and more important than people that are protesting for black life, then you should not say nothing about black owned. Don't have a peace march around fairgrounds, around the black community. Come do it here. This is where the stop the violence. This is the stop the violence march. The occupation is the only stop the violence march or demonstration.
Yeah, I think that, and then let me see. I wanted to find the year. that Rockford was founded. 1834 is where it says. It says Rockford traces its roots to 1834 as the combined settlements of Midway were founded on both banks of the Rock River. Okay, so and the reason that I bring that up is to say that in 1834. We could take time to look through all of the things that happened, but I'm sure we could find a very amount of notable racist actions that were perpetuating out of America. Anybody that has any type of understanding of America, even somebody who would fight critical race theory, would at least be able to I would hope, admit that it was racism that was perpetuating, even in Illinois, during this time, during 1834. And so I say that to say that we have to do a better job of tracing back certain issues to the root. And so when you trace back issues to the root, and you say that the city was founded in 1834, in 1834 America was steeped in racism, we have to look at what strides has America made forward since 1864 and 1834 in racism, and then which strides have Rockford made forward since 1834 in racism. And I think that, again, this isn't something that I'm doing right here, right now. This is a theoretical terminology. But if we were to gauge the amount of individual racism that existed in 1834 to what exists in Rockford in 2021, I'm 100% sure that the individual racism would be down. It would be, I'm sure, down by leaps and bounds. One of the reasons would be because there's now more black people who are here. So that does something to defer the manner the individual racism can exist. But if we were to go and say in 1834, how fair of a trial could a black person have if they were in Rockford? I would say that in 2021, the question is still there: is how fair of a trial can be had for a black person here? And again, that's not a violent situation, but that's just to speak about the institutional issues. The same thing. If we were to look in 1834 and see what type of police violence or whatever the institutional violence of that day would have been, it was a time where people would come from Illinois, be in Illinois. You could get, if you were black, you could get taken into slavery. You could be pulled back into slavery. And so, again, I say all those things to say that the violence of the society, the violence of the nation at that time has to be considered into the type of violence that was within Rockford. And so then once you go from, let's take a big leap from 1834 to 1950, 1960. The Ku Klux Klan in 1990 marched in Rockford. So it would be very unlikely that it wasn't a branch of the Ku Klux Klan that was existing in 1960 in Rockford. The same things, the communities, the segregation that exists in Rockford is something that is historic. The west side of Rockford has been historically segregated to, that is the area and the place in which black people have been relegated to. If we were to trace back how much resources were being given to the area black people were in the 1950s and how much resources are being given to it now, 2021, I don't think it would be an exponential difference like how it would be with the individual racism. And that's why I brought up individual racism from then to now, is that I do believe, because of the combination of being in the North, which means that the racism here was already a covert type of racism, which that is one of the things, that is whether it's something that we, it's not the end goal or not. But if you start off in a society where the racism is overt, before you get rid of the racism, you're going to have to make it covert. That's going to be the next thing that happens. If everybody is overt and out and openly racist, and you start taking and beating down some of that racism, they not just all of a sudden going to stop being racist. You might get a few people that you educate and learn, but the masses is just going to hide the racism. And then I think what that does is that makes it so that the next generation, it's easier to get them to not be as racist. It's easier to break into that shell. And so I say all those things to say that being in the North made it where the racism was already at a certain point in time more covert. It was more institutional already. So it wasn't it wasn't as much individual. It was still very much individual, but not as much. So that's one of their strengths, was already institutional racism. And so I think that that's one of the things that has to be addressed, is the institutional racism is the same.
And to that point, as I was thinking, really, you didn't need a KKK unless you felt your power slipping a little bit. In order for you not to need a KKK, that means your city government, your police force is doing the job that the KKK is supposed to step in. And an example of that, wait for this. An example is that elders in the city of Rockford tell me about the time when Jesse Jackson, I believe some other civil rights leaders, tried to come to Rockford in 1960. It was right after Dr. King's assassination, and people were doing marches and things. They said that the police, the sheriffs, or whatever, Rockford and surrounding areas, met them at the Morgan Street Bridge. Yeah, told them, no, you don't need the Ku Klux Klan when your police department is doing that work. you know, and to the point of education, like I said, our community should be engaged in nothing but education. Neely Fuller Jr. talked about that. He said one of the ways to avoid violence, intercommunity violence, is stop celebrations. Every time you say you having a celebration, change it to education. And you will like this, Leslie. So it shouldn't have been a Juneteenth celebration. It should have been Juneteenth education. Was no education jumping off. It shouldn't be no Kwanzaa celebration. It should be Kwanzaa education. It shouldn't be what's the other. It shouldn't be no. We were having Black History Month celebrations of black people who advanced in the white power structure. We didn't have education of African heritage or black heritage, critical analysis and education that would redirect people's mind from suicidal tendencies and suicidal thoughts. And so I focus a lot on the psychic aspect of racism and violence, but there is a material economic, which you talked about, about the way that, look at the weed tax. Let's look at that again. You touched on it in a live. 400,000. I think that's the first installment of funding. But compare 400,000, and this is what we talk about, powerlessness, where our people are powerless to the point where we are in a position where we will take 400,000, or they're going to split it up amongst people.
Yeah, splitting it up. They got different sets.
Right, and telling you what to do with it. Not an education on what the violence, how to avoid the violence, how to get involved in the liberation struggle, how to educate how to educate our youth, but split in 400,000 first installment, when in reality, black people were supposed to have a dispensary or some land in which they could grow the marijuana themselves, not the white leaders passing out, showing our youth powerlessness, further frustrating them, making them want to go pick up a gun and slap somebody in the head again because they see that we weak. 400,000 in the dispensary. This is taxes from the white-owned dispensaries.
And one of the things Terry was saying is that one of the things that we was talking about before is that they tax upwards to like 50% on like some of the products there. That like based on the concentrate is how much they tax. So like I guess buzz they tax least on, but something like wax they taxing up to 50%. Up to 50%, and then that's another one of the things where it's a reminder of the society, and I don't want to be like disparaging, because I think a lot of times you have to be mindful of the fact that you're privileged to come into where people are privileged to be born at the times in which they are born in, even when negative things may happen to them in which that time. And I say that to say that I was privileged enough to be born in a time in which education about marijuana was more prevalent. The negative ideologies that people had about marijuana were nowhere near as strong. The war on drugs was beginning to get to a place where more people were having deeper dialogues about it. Rap music was a bigger thing. How High, before I had ever smoked weed when I was a kid, I watched How High and I thought How High was funny. And I didn't know what the hell half of it was about, but the stigma was never there for me. So I don't want to be too, judgmental when I'm saying, when I say some of these things, but there have been families that have been torn apart because one of the family members wanted to sell weed. They like smoking weed. They enjoyed growing weed. They was good at selling weed. And because of that, they went back and forth to jail a lot. And I think this is another one of the things that people don't talk about enough is that certain things get normalized. People, the jails work in a way, and which people get institutionalized, and getting institutionalized means that you willing to, the same way that Kevin Durant tearing his ACL could be part of playing basketball. He might not be able to walk for 11 months, and he willing to take that risk, or CTE might be a risk that a football player could take. People who sell weed was willing to take the risk of going to jail and doing the time for the weed. They love selling weed. They love weed. They love growing weed. And when you think about how many families have been destroyed because of that ambition or that desire or that choice in life, and then when you think about the amount of disproportionately how that would be people who were, poor or people of color, depending on which, level of the game they were, the selling weed they may have been in. But when you then contrast that to the people who are able to even have a dispensary, sell the weed at the dispensary and get the license for it, and then how much money that they now are making without none of the risk being there now. All of the risk is completely gone. And then when you even think about, and this is, the first time I've ever had this idea, but an argument could be made that this is very much, in a way, similar to slavery, in which black people and brown people have laid the groundwork for this. It's just like the amount of weed, the think about what is being taxed now. They sold it at way less prices. No matter how expensive your weed man was, he don't cost as much as the weed costs here. So they sold it at way less prices. They built the culture around it. They done built the clientele for the people around it. Even the people who maybe never did it before, who gonna try for the first time, the reason they gonna try for the first time is because of the culture and the clientele that these other people done built around it. And now they not gonna get, and truthfully, none of the true benefits from it, not owning stock and stuff like that. No, go ahead.
And then on top of that is a saying that says, if you hide the wrong that you do, you must be doing the wrong thing still. So if when they talked about how they couldn't find, basically minorities, black people in particular, that are in a financial situation to open a dispensary. So because of systematic racism, we're not in it. But, if you don't talk about it from that standpoint, okay, we understand that through systematic racism, there's been 3 lawsuits on the school district in Rockford. I mean, over since the 1960s was the first one. So we know we're not educating, especially around financial literacy. The young people aren't, there was redlining. There was the two ways, the easiest, most efficient ways to build wealth in America is through home ownership and a college degree. And they systematically discriminated in those 2 areas. So then to turn around in 2021, or maybe it was 2019 in Rockford, and justify the fact that there's no black-owned dispensaries in Rockford, the black people, they not in a financial situation to open a well, then how do we get them in that financial situation, right? Because at one point it was a threat in Illinois that they was going to stop the whole program or the legal until more minorities got in it. And I understand that women are used as a minority to make it where black people specifically don't end up. But that's the thing too. So you got the 400,000 you gonna give out and never have a critical analysis or a critical a code of conduct to correct the injustice that there's no black dispensary, where 400,000, like you said, a good weed man make that, a good weed man. How much is the dispensary making? How much is the dispensary making? How much would a marijuana farm on the south side, how much would that generate? And also psychologically destigmatize these youth who, in which marijuana has been a part of their culture or their family, for generations, and reverse the thinking that everything they do is bad, everything they do is negative. Well, this is something that you do very positive and know how to do very positive, which is $1 billion industry, and we're not going to settle for a $400,000 grant to run programs that don't even have at its root critical race theory, don't even address racism.
And we got the phone battery getting a little low here, so I think that, and we knocked out this was good. We got through a nice amount of time. I think that one of the things that we'll have to do with this is the first one of this nature that we've done like this, but I think that one of the things that we can do with this is to double back to this conversation again, maybe even add different people to the conversation, maybe have people ask questions. Me and you can maybe add on to things. So I think this is something that we can regularly talk about, and I think that it will always have benefits from it. Before I do our closing for out here, is anything you want to say at the end?
No, just justice for Tyrus, justice for Faustin, justice for Jose Gonzalez, justice for Logan Bell, justice for Demetrius Bennett, Justice for Michael Sago Jr., justice for all the names that are on the memorials. The memorials are back up, so come see them when you get a chance. And like I said, I heard when Leslie, it could have been months ago, Leslie was talking about building a platform out here, and we appreciate this platform. I appreciate this platform where we can come and discuss critical issues like this.
All right, and Antar hit it right on the head there. So anybody that's watching this, please share this video. City Market tomorrow, Friday. Please go out to City Market to protest. We are in full boycott City Market mode. There's plenty of videos and plenty of information on why we are saying boycott.
Don't be like Taraji P. Henson. Now that Empire fell off, ironically, the show is Empire, a racist empire. And you chose that over empowering the black man who told you it was his idea. Now that that TV show crumbled, and Power is yeah. Don't be like that. We told you about City Market that they're violent, that they're racist.
Yes. Facts, 100%. So City Market, go to the City Market protest. And I want to point this out too. They're getting ready to have a 8/15 day coming up. It's going to be a whole weekend. They had a press conference. We will be protesting in some manner at 8/15 day and at 8/15 weekend. Stroll on State coming. We going to protest at Stroll on State. Something Labor Day. It's a Labor Day parade coming up. We gonna protest at the Labor Day parade. We in the process of putting together some vigils for some of the upcoming anniversaries of some of the murders that have taken place here. So we just want to keep everybody attuned to everything that's going on. We're working on 2 more pamphlets to put out. I know it may not always seem like it, and this is something I got to remind myself as well. But we always in the process. We always working. We always taking a step forward. And slow motion is better than no motion. And this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So we gonna wrap this one up like how we wrap up all the videos. Justice for Demetrius Bennett. Justice for Logan Bell. Justice for Jovan Fresco. Justice for Kerry Blake. Justice for Geno Washington. Justice for Philip Johnson. Justice for Mark Barmore. Justice for Suzette Babler. Justice for Jasper Banks. Justice for Faustin Guaitigo. Justice for Shannon Graves. Justice for Lil Mike Sago. Justice for Mikey Guzman. Justice for Joseph McCormick. And justice for Eddie Patterson. We outside. Share this.